Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at us, testing our resilience and our ability to overcome hardship. In today's story, we follow the journey of a young girl named Amber, whose world is turned upside down after the loss of her father. As she navigates through a new family dynamic filled with betrayal, neglect, and emotional turmoil, Amber learns some of life's hardest lessons. But in the end, she discovers that true family isn't about blood, it's about love. Thank you for joining us on Life Stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to start today's story. Amber was just a child when her world, as she had known it, was shattered. It was a Tuesday morning, a regular school day, when her father, Jack, sat her down on the couch. His face was serious, in a way she had never seen before, and his voice shook slightly as he held her hand. She could feel the tremor in his fingers. And though she didn't yet understand why, something told her this moment was more important than any other in her life. "I need to tell you something important," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Those were the words that forever changed Amber's reality. The word cancer hung in the air, strange and unfamiliar, but it carried a weight that even a child could sense. At that moment, she didn't fully grasp the gravity of what it meant, but she knew enough to understand that things were about to change. She saw her father's once strong and vibrant frame slowly becoming frail, and it terrified her. She clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, things would turn out differently, but deep down, Amber knew that the world she had grown up in was about to be turned upside down. In the days and months that followed, their home became a revolving door of doctors, relatives, and well-wishers. It was a strange, surreal time for Amber. She felt trapped between the world of childhood innocence and the harsh reality of illness. Her father, who had once been a pillar of strength, was no longer the man he had been. Slowly, day by day, he faded away, and with him, a piece of her heart seemed to vanish too. Her mother, Sarah, tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but nothing was normal anymore. Amber saw the strain in her mother's eyes, the forced smiles she wore during the day, and the tears that fell quietly in the night. Amber would sit outside their bedroom door, not daring to enter, unsure of what to say. What could she say? How could she offer comfort when she, too, was drowning in grief? When her father passed away, Amber was only 11. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, hushed voices, and sorrowful faces. Her mother held her hand tightly, as though afraid she might slip away. But Amber didn't mind. She thought, perhaps naively, that they would get through this together. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a painful journey that would reshape her entire understanding of family. A week after the funeral, Sarah sat Amber down alone in the living room. Amber, still raw from the loss of her father, looked up at her mother, hoping for comfort. But instead, Sarah spoke words that Amber would never forget. "I've been talking to your grandmother," she said, not quite meeting Amber's eyes. "I think it would be best if you stayed with her for a little while, just until I can get things sorted out. I need some time alone, honey, to process everything, to figure out how to move forward." Amber's heart sank. "But why can't I stay here with you?" she asked, her voice small, a pit of sadness growing inside her. Sarah tucked a strand of Amber's hair behind her ear, but the gesture felt hollow, empty. "It'll just be for a few months," she said, her voice faltering. But Amber knew that this wasn't just about time. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't yet understand. The next day, Grandma Margaret arrived at their house to pick Amber up. The car ride to Grandma's was silent, and Amber could sense that Grandma was holding something back. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and though she didn't say much, Amber could feel the disapproval radiating from her. She wasn't happy about this situation, either. Grandma's house was a modest two-story home, far from the warmth and security of the house Amber had shared with her parents. Still, Amber tried to settle in. Over the next few months, Her mother would call every few weeks. The conversations were always the same. When can I come home? Amber would ask. And Sarah would always answer with the same. Practiced patience. Just a little longer. Sweetie. Just a little longer. But Amber missed her mother terribly. And no matter how hard Grandma tried to make her feel welcome, it wasn't home. Grandma cooked her favorite meals, helped her with her homework, and told her stories about her father when he was young. Yet, it didn't fill the emptiness that had settled inside Amber's chest. 6 months passed, and Amber began to wonder if her mother would ever come for her. She kept waiting for the day when Sarah would come and take her home, when things would go back to how they were before. But that day never came. Instead, when Sarah finally came to pick her up, Amber barely recognized her. Her mother's hair was styled. Her makeup was fresh. And she was wearing a new dress. But it was the man beside her that caught Amber's attention, a man she had never seen before. Amber, Sarah said, practically bouncing with excitement. I want you to meet someone special. His name is Robert. He's wonderful. Amber. He's a successful businessman. And he has 2 daughters about your age. Isn't that exciting? You're going to have sisters. Amber didn't know what to feel. The man in the car, Robert, didn't even look at her. He was staring straight ahead. His face unreadable. Amber's heart sank. This wasn't the family reunion she had imagined. It wasn't the homecoming she had hoped for. But as Sarah ushered her into the car, Amber had no choice but to go along with it. What else could she do? When they arrived at their new home, Amber felt a sharp pang of loss. The house, though large and well kept, felt foreign. It wasn't the cozy home where she had shared so many memories with her father. The walls, the furniture, even the air felt different. It wasn't hers. The house that her parents had built together, full of laughter and warmth, was now just a cold shell, a place that no longer held the comfort she had known. Robert, her new stepfather, was distant. His presence was like a shadow, looming but never truly reaching out. Amber could feel the distance between them like an unspoken barrier. He didn't try to get to know her, didn't try to understand her grief. Instead, he treated her as though she were a piece of furniture, something that had simply been added to the house without much thought. Her new stepsisters, Emma and Lisa, were no better. Emma, the older one, was all smiles on the outside, but her eyes were cold. She didn't even look at Amber the way a sister should. Lisa, the younger one, was even worse, her sweet voice masking a venomous nature. They were a package deal. Amber realized, part of the perfect family that her mother seemed to be building. And in that perfect family, there was no room for Amber. The tension between them was palpable. Amber was the outsider, the intruder in this new life that her mother had built. It was clear from the start that Emma and Lisa had no intention of accepting her. They didn't even try to hide their disdain. At dinner, they would talk over her, barely acknowledging her presence, as if she didn't matter. The smiles, the kind words, the cheerful facade, Amber could see right through it. They weren't really a family. They were just a collection of people playing roles, pretending for appearances. Her mother, Sarah, was different now too. She had changed. Amber had hoped that her mother would be the same loving person she had been before Jack's death. But instead, Sarah seemed more concerned with maintaining the illusion of a perfect life. She showered Robert's daughters with attention and affection, while barely sparing a glance for Amber. She tried so hard to prove her devotion to Robert, to make him and his daughters feel at home, that she forgot about Amber. It was as if, with her father's passing, Amber had become an afterthought, a footnote in the story her mother was trying to write. Amber's birthday that year was a stark reminder of just how much had changed. Emma and Lisa received expensive gifts, designer clothes, new iPads, things that Amber could never even imagine owning. But Amber, she got a basic phone and a few cheap sweaters from the discount store. Her heart sank as she opened her gifts. It wasn't about the presents. Really. It was about the message behind them. Amber wasn't part of this family. She was nothing more than an obligation. Something to be tolerated but not truly loved. But Grandma Margaret was there. She was the one who always had Amber's back. The one person who had never let her down. When Amber turned 13, Grandma gave her a beautiful silver locket with a picture of her father inside. It was the first gift in a long time that made her feel seen, loved, and cared for. But even that was short-lived. The next time Amber saw Emma and Lisa, they eyed the locket with envy. "That's so pretty," Emma said, her voice sweet. But there was an underlying edge to it. "You should share it with me. That's what sisters do, right?" Amber clutched the locket tightly, unwilling to let it go. The next day, she found the chain mysteriously broken. The locket lying on her bed like a cruel reminder of the family she was never going to be a part of. It was a small thing, but it cut deep. Amber confronted Lisa. But of course, Lisa denied it, flashing her sweetest smile and saying, "Prove it was me." There were other things. Two more subtle signs of the tension that simmered beneath the surface. One time, Grandma had sent Amber a limited edition set of art supplies. A gift for her birthday. Amber had always loved drawing, and these supplies were just like the ones her father had used. But when she returned to her room one evening, she found the sketchbook soaked in water, the expensive pencil snapped in half. Again, when she confronted Lisa, she received nothing but a smirk. "Prove it was me." When Amber showed her mother the ruined supplies, she didn't get the support she had hoped for. Instead, Sarah sighed, dismissing Amber's feelings. "You probably left them out in the rain yourself. Stop blaming your sisters for everything." It wasn't just the material things. It was the emotional toll. Amber could feel herself becoming invisible. Her mother's attention was always focused on Robert and his daughters, leaving Amber to fend for herself. And as much as Amber tried to hold on to the love she had for her mother, it was becoming harder and harder. The more Sarah showered Robert's daughters with affection, the more Amber felt like she was being pushed further and further away. And then, when Amber turned 15, Sarah dropped another bombshell. She was pregnant. The house erupted with excitement, everyone except Amber. That is, Robert's daughters were thrilled, chattering about what it would be like to have a baby brother or sister, while Amber sat quietly, already knowing what this meant. The baby's arrival would only further cement Amber's place as an outsider in this new family. The baby arrived in the spring, just a few weeks after Sarah had come home from the hospital. Michael, a boy, was born into a family that was already so broken. Amber had known from the moment Sarah's pregnancy was announced that this would only make things worse. She would no longer have her own space. Her place in the family had already been taken over by Robert and his daughters. And now the baby would join the lineup of priorities that would, inevitably, push Amber further into the background. It wasn't long before the living arrangements were altered to accommodate the new addition. Amber was called into a family meeting, if it could even be called that. Robert and Sarah had already made their decision before they'd even spoken to her. The baby, Michael, needed his own room, they said. And Amber, well, they thought it would be best if she moved in with Emma and Lisa. Amber's heart dropped at the thought of it. This was her room, her father's room. It had been a sanctuary for her, a place where she could still feel his presence, feel the love that had once filled the house. It was more than just a physical space, it was a connection to the past, to the man who had raised her. She wasn't ready to give that up, not to make room for a child she had never asked for. The conversation quickly turned into an argument, the kind that Amber had grown so accustomed to. Her mother, once the source of comfort, now stood there, her face red with frustration. "Amber, how can you be so selfish?" Sarah's voice trembled, but there was no warmth in it. "Robert has been nothing but good to you. He's trying to help us all." "Good to me?" Amber shot back. her voice thick with disbelief. He doesn't even see me. He walks past me like I'm invisible. Emma and Lisa, of course, were silent. They didn't need to say anything, they had made it clear enough from the start that Amber wasn't part of their family. They didn't care that she had lost her father. They didn't care about anything that wasn't convenient for them. When the argument ended, Amber felt like she was suffocating. She couldn't stay in this house any longer. Not with people who treated her like an afterthought. For the first time in years, Amber made a decision for herself. The next morning, she packed her things, grabbed her bag, and walked out of the house without looking back. Grandma Margaret was there, waiting for Amber with open arms, as she always had been. When Amber arrived at her grandmother's house, it felt like breathing again. The tension that had suffocated her for so long lifted, and she was able to rest. It was here, in this small, quiet home, that Amber began to heal. Grandma's house was where Amber could finally exhale, where she could shed the weight of her mother's expectations and the cold indifference of her stepfamily. It was here that Amber began to rediscover who she was, outside the roles that had been forced on her. Time passed, and Amber settled into a new routine. Grandma would cook her favorite meals. They would work on her school projects together. And they would really talk about life. About her father. About dreams for the future. There were no hidden agendas. No ulterior motives. Grandma's love for Amber was unconditional. Unwavering. After a few months, Grandma sat Amber down one evening. Her face serious but kind. Amber had grown accustomed to these serious talks. It was how Grandma communicated her care, her wisdom. But this time, it was different. Amber, Grandma began, taking her hands in hers. I need to tell you something. I've been talking to your mother. She's willing to give up her parental rights. I want to adopt you officially. Amber stared at her grandmother, hardly able to believe the words. It was an overwhelming feeling, gratitude, relief, and even a bit of disbelief. This was the first time since her father's death that Amber had truly felt wanted. Her grandmother had never stopped loving her, never wavered in her support. This wasn't about obligation or duty, it was about love. Real love. The kind that didn't come with strings attached. Really? Amber's voice caught in her throat. Is it really okay? Are you sure? Grandma smiled softly, brushing a tear from Amber's cheek. Of course it's okay. This has always been your home. I would be honored to be your legal guardian. For the first time in a long while, Amber allowed herself to believe in a future where she could feel loved, valued, and important. She hugged Grandma tightly, the tears flowing freely now. This was the family Amber had always longed for, the one built on love, not obligation. The legal process was surprisingly smooth. Amber's mother, Sarah, signed the papers without hesitation. And with that, Amber was officially adopted by Grandma Margaret. The decision was final. And Amber was finally free from the manipulative grasp of her mother and her stepfamily. As Amber packed up her things to leave the house where she had once lived, she felt a sense of finality. Her old room, her father's room, was now a nursery for Michael. Everything had changed, and Amber wasn't sure she was ready to face it. But there was no turning back. The life she had known was gone, and in its place was a new beginning, one that was all her own. As Amber settled into her new life, the distance between her and her past seemed to grow with every passing day. Grandma's house had become her sanctuary, and though the memories of her old family lingered, they no longer held power over her. The betrayal, the neglect, and the emotional scars had all started to fade into something she could learn from, rather than something that defined her. Years passed, and Amber found herself not only surviving but thriving. She finished school, earned a scholarship, and pursued a future that was completely her own. Her relationship with her biological family became something distant, almost like an old story she had read once, painful, but no longer controlling her. Then one day, while checking her messages, Amber received a call from her mother. The voice on the other end was filled with the same false sweetness Amber had once known all too well. But something had changed in her. This time, the conversation wasn't about money or manipulation. Instead, it was a hesitant attempt at re-establishing some form of connection. A realization of the years lost. Amber listened. But she had learned enough by then to recognize the patterns. She knew that her true family wasn't the one she was born into, but the one she had built with her grandmother. The people who had loved her not for what she could give, but for who she was. Amber smiled softly to herself. The past had shaped her, but it would never define her again. She had found her own way, and in doing so, she had discovered what it meant to truly belong. Thank you for listening to this life story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and heartfelt stories. Stay tuned for our next video.